I saw more comments than I expected requesting the Javelin weapon guide, and I figured, why not? Let's just make the Javelin guide. The Javelin is definitely a more underappreciated weapon, but it does have some cool things going for it, and in the wake of all of the Core Crusher over-centralization discussion, I figured it might be interesting to cover a weapon who has a lot of its identity in electric element. And as a favor to those who wanted to see that in action, yes, I will be covering the Electric Javelin build, or at least an Electric Javelin build, while also showcasing the maximum potential Ether build after that too, to cover everything. As always, if you enjoy guide content like this on Xenoblade Chronicles X, please be sure to subscribe to the channel because it does help me out so much. I'm getting very close to that 100,000 subscriber mark and would really love to hit that milestone soon, and every little bit helps. Let's get started. Let's start by talking about all of the arts that the Javelin has access to because we have quite a few options here. First up, we have Balance Breaker. This is an attribute weapon-based art, so that means whatever your weapon is going to be the damage of the art, so it can be ether-based if you want to run it as an ether-based weapon. This will deal weapon damage and inflict stagger in melee combos, so if you trigger a melee combo, you will inflict the stagger effect. Stagger is kind of the equivalent of break in this game. Essentially, if you apply stagger to an enemy, you will be guaranteed to topple that enemy. The problem is, you can also topple the enemy without ever applying stagger, and if you have enough resistance reduction, like inside of Overdrive, or with a resistance reduction augment, it is very easy to topple the enemy without ever having to inflict stagger, so this bonus effect doesn't end up mattering too much. However, the fact that it is an attribute-based attack can make it useful on non-electric-based builds just because of that. When one hit, 400% hit scaling, it's not the worst damaging option that you have available to you at the very least. Next up, we have Arcing Horn. Now, if you are planning to run the Electric Javelin build, this is pretty much a required arc. This will inflict electric resistance down on the enemy, and you definitely want to do that to do as much damage as possible. It also will increase damage by 150% if you trigger it in a melee combo, so you want to kind of focus on those melee combos. Once again, a melee combo is just triggered by using the art, any art from the weapon type before this art. So any other melee art before this art will trigger that melee combo. But the main use of this is going to be just applying that electric resistance down more than anything. It's one hit, 450% hit scaling, so that's not the highest in the world, but you really want that electric resistance down to make your other electric-based attacks do more damage. Next up, we have Overwhelm. This is also another attribute-based attack, and it's actually pretty hard-hitting for a debuff effect. It will inflict fatigue, and the higher your health, the more damage you will do, and since it's very easy to have 100% of your health, you should get that 150% damage bonus every single time. The fact that this is also a 3-hit purple art makes it one of the best arts you can possibly have on your bar for Overdrive, because once you get to that maximum Overdrive count, or once you build up some count, you can restore 3,000 TP at maximum count just by using this art. That is very significant, and it gives you a lot of TP back to basically instantly reactivate Overdrive, be able to use your TP arts more often. This is a very useful art. 100% recommended on pretty much every bar that you want to use Javelin on. Very good purple art, one of the absolute best in the games for that alone. Next up, we have some of the auras. Now, the first one here is Speed Demon. I pretty much don't recommend running this at all. You get much more mileage out of the other aura that the Javelin has, or from your ranged weapon, honestly. The Speed Demon will reduce your cooldown when you are sprinting, and recover health when you are sprinting. So basically, you have to interrupt your actual art spam and your general combat effects to just start running around to get benefit out of this. Now, I could see this maybe having some use outside of Overdrive, but in Overdrive, cooldowns are so short anyway, you should never really have downtime where you have to be sprinting to get those cooldown reductions, and you should probably never need the health restoring effect either. So I do not recommend running this art. Raijin, the other aura, I do recommend running, especially if you plan on doing the Reflect build. This will boost your critical chance, which is a pretty good effect on its own. It also ends up restoring HP if you really need it to do that when you use arts, which you're going to be doing a lot, especially in Overdrive, and it will reflect electric attacks. The reflection part of this aura is what makes it really powerful, as there are augments in this game that allow you to reflect enemy damage types, and if you have those equipped to your character, then when you activate any aura that reflects enemy attacks, you are going to be able to reflect those damage types as well. This means you can effectively reflect every single type of damage in the game with the right setup, and this means you are going to be basically invincible against everything that doesn't have an art that specifically bypasses reflections. So Raijin is very good because of that. One of the things you might want to lean into as one of the unique aspects of the Javelin that you can just kind of take advantage of to reflect basically every type of damage. So because of that, that is one of the auras I'm going to be running here to just kind of show that off today. Next up, we have Hair Trigger. This grants Supercharge. Now, I talked about this in the Assault Rifle video also, but Supercharge only affects the first hit of an art. This, unfortunately, makes it significantly less useful than it could be otherwise, especially for one of your really strong TP arts that is a lot of hits. However, I am still running it anyway because of the shorter cooldown and the fact that you have a green art here that you can just kind of use before your count builder and overdrive. And you can kind of use it to trigger those melee combos as well. So there is still some benefit out of this, and you can get some extra damage out of it as well. And it can be useful for your other TP art, but we'll talk about the problems with that art a little bit later here. But regardless, Hair Trigger, it's only green art on Javelin, so that still makes it somewhat useful to have, and it can trigger melee combos. And Supercharge is still not a bad effect. You still get some extra damage out of it. Next up, we have Vortex. This will deal electric damage and inflict stun in melee combos. So if you trigger a melee combo with Vortex, you will have a chance of inflicting stun. Stun will increase the amount of damage that you deal to an enemy and also kind of pause the enemy for a little bit of time. So this is not a bad effect to have. It also is electric element. So I like personally running it on electric builds. It is also similar to Sky High on dual guns, where you are able to kind of freeze yourself in midair if you use it. Now, I was told that was patched out of the game for Sky High, but it seems like that may not have actually been patched out after all if you activate Overdrive first after your skull gets broken. So you might still be able to do the funny glitch with both Vortex and with Sky High, and if that's the case, that makes Vortex a little bit more valuable just because it's funny, right? Regardless, Vortex is a pretty decent art, Stun is a pretty good effect, and it works pretty well in electric combo since this is a locked electric art. Next up, we have Spiral Horn. This is probably not going to be the most useful art you have access to, but it can deal extra damage in a melee combo, and it is an attribute-based art, so you are able to use this with Ether builds as just kind of an option if you really want to get some extra damage out of it. But the hit scaling isn't the greatest. It's only a single hit, and it applies physical resistance down, so you can't even increase your damage with other more useful elements that effectively. So Spiral Horn's probably not going to be the greatest art most of the time, but on specific builds, it might be something to consider running. Next up, we have Trident Buster. This will deal electric damage guaranteed. This is electric attribute attack, and it will inflict shock and boost damage in ranged combos. So you want to use a ranged art before you use this. That means if you did use Vortex before this, since it's a single hit art and can apply shock, you would need to use a different ranged attack that doesn't trigger your supercharge, right? If you want to get the most benefit out of that single hit of supercharge, you would need to probably use something like Ghostwalker, something like Primer, in order to make sure you don't trigger the supercharge so you can go into Trident Buster, get that ranged combo bonus, and get the shock off. Now, the problem with shock is a lot of enemies, especially some of the strongest super bosses, are going to be immune to shock. So that makes it significantly less useful when we're fighting some of these higher level ones, some of these stronger enemies than it otherwise could be. However, if you are fighting an enemy that is not immune to shock, and you want to run an electric build, this is not necessarily a bad art. You can run Hair Trigger, you can use a dual gun art or something, or a ranged weapon art before that doesn't trigger your supercharge. Use this Trident Buster with a potential based build. You'll probably get a lot of decent damage and you can trigger shock. And, maybe you can even extend shock with some certain effects with your skull or something. So there's some options here. There's good arts that can support this, like Conduction Rise. There's a lot of things that you can do in this game with this if you want to. I'll be focused mainly on using the other TP-based art in this video because I think it's going to be more consistently useful, but it is still an option to have. Next up, we have Mind Shift. This will deal weapon damage and remove enemy debuffs, and also boost TP based on debuff tiers. Now, this might seem good at first glance for having 600% hit scaling, being an attribute-based attack, but the problem is going to be the fact that the secondary and tertiary cooldown bonuses are immediate reuse, meaning you're not actually getting that 400% damage bonus from tertiary, which is an independent multiplier, so you're actually going to be missing a lot of damage from Mind Shift. I'd also say that removing enemy debuffs just for getting some TP back is never going to be that good anyway. You're much better off restoring your TP with your purple art Overwhelm than ever doing this, because a lot of times you're going to want to keep that electric resistance down on or any of the other debuffs you have applied to the enemy over actually using this to boost your TP from removing the debuff, since it's a really small amount compared to how much you can get in overdrive from other effects. So Mind Shift is probably one of your worst arts because of that. And then finally, we have Maximum Voltage. This is probably going to be your main art for damage. I'm going to be running a potential build solely because of this art. It is a 12-hit art with 250% hit scaling, which means you have 3,000% hit scaling total, so it is definitely going to be your most powerful art just because of that, and that is going to make the potential build for Javelin more viable than the melee build, in my opinion, so that is what we're going to be focused on. The bonus effect is also additionally really, really funny. If you have your skull destroyed in combat, you get 800% more damage when you use this. This means that optimal Javelin play is going to be getting your skull destroyed, so you can get that 800% damage bonus every time you use this, because you really want that effect to get the most damage and benefit out of the Javelin weapon. So, boot up that level 20 skull, get ready to get it destroyed by some super bosses over and over, get ready to hit those perfect QTEs to make sure you don't lose insurance on it, alright? So, yep, if you want to get the most benefit out of the Javelin, if you want to do the most damage possible, you gotta destroy your skull. And you know what? that's kind of funny, so it's alright. Although, even if you don't destroy your skull, you'll probably be alright anyway. Now, I am running the dual guns as my supporting weapon here, but I'm not really focused on Ghostwalker for the electric build, since we obviously have reflection damage for most things that we're going to be looking at here. However, there are two reasons that I am running this. One is just going to be 0-0, because it's one of the best overdrive count builders, and that's what I'm mainly using it for. And using it after Vortex is actually a really good way or hair trigger, I mean, is actually a really good way to boost your TP. You get basically 600 TP if you trigger it after hair trigger. So you can kind of alternate hair trigger and 0-0 to both build overdrive count and get TP back very efficiently early on in overdrive. And I think that is pretty useful and pretty nice to have as an effect. And then we also have Combat Limbo, which can freeze the effects of Raijin and other buffs that you may have, so you don't have to keep refreshing that art specifically. So using Combat Limbo can kind of allow you to use Raijin less often, so you don't have to worry about it or think about it as much, and it can freeze any other buffs that you might get from other parts of combat. For my skills, since I am not running Core Crusher for the electric build, I'm just running the electric boost skill instead, which is just a flat 50% multiplier to electric damage that gets added to all of the other additive damage bonuses that you have. You could run something else here. There is another really good skill if you are able to actually apply shock to enemies. If you can apply shock, then Conductive Strike can actually give you 300% additional damage to enemies that are inflicted with shock. That just depends on if the enemy is actually immune to shock or if they have really high resistance to shock and if you want to run this or not. But it is an option to consider at the very least. The other stuff I'm running here I think is just going to be generally useful no matter what. Inner Search will boost your potential by 20%, giving you a really nice option for potential. Now, if you want to go into the Mastermind class, you can also get a potential boost that way, but that only multiplies your base stat potential, so it might be a little bit less useful because of that, but that is a way to get more potential at the cost of a singular skill slot if you think you can kind of forego one of these skills. Or Assault is just really, really good as an independent multiplier to all of your melee attack and melee art damage, and also your TP arts that are melee-based. So I definitely recommend running this if you're using any kind of melee weapon for damage, especially Javelin. Secondary Accelerator, a great skill just for reducing secondary cooldowns by 50%, allows you to use a lot of arts more often. Very, very good skill. And finally, I'm actually running the Supreme Sword, which will boost damage by another 100% when triggering melee combos, just to get as much damage as I can out of the Javelin. You could consider Fast Forward instead to use some of your arts even more often, since that'll also reduce art cooldown by 50% when you trigger a melee combo here. There are some other options you can maybe consider as well, but I think these are probably going to be the primarily useful and most beneficial things that you could probably consider running, especially if you're not running Core Crusher. And if you are running Core Crusher, obviously you can just replace Electric Boost with Core Crusher, and I will be showing that off a little bit later as well. Next up, we have the setup. The setup here is not super complicated since I'm running a potential-based build. I'm trying to get as much potential as I can. Now, you can get more potential if you don't run the Reflect build. If you run a Ghostwalker set instead, you can get more potential because you can free up augment slots on your armor for more potential up. See, that is the problem with the potential-based builds. It's that potential is an armor augment slot, so you are going to have to run potential on your armor augment in order to get the most benefit out of it. Fortunately, even with only 2 potential up augments, I am able to kind of maximize my potential and get almost 600 potential anyway, which is enough to do a lot of damage, just by having weapons that allow me to kind of focus on that. I've got Ultra Nebula and Dyads that have both potential up and potential boost as their trait effects, and this is going to maximize potential since I've maxed those out. And then I have an Ultra Diamond Bolide and electric-based Javelin here that also has potential up as an effect. Now, I didn't max this out for the sake of saving on my resources, so you can get even more potential if you're using an electric-based build here, but I think if you're going to run an electric-based Javelin, this is probably going to be one of the best weapon options that you have available to you. Now, a lot of arts are locked to electric anyway, so you could consider running something else, but since we are running an electric-based damage with the maximum voltage, we want to make sure we can take advantage of that with the electric attribute damage, since we're lowering electric resistance of enemies. So I think the Ultra Diamond Bolide is going to be your best bet to do that. Also, you have the Ultra Infinite Screen, the headpiece that also has double potential traits. Potential up and potential boost on that also boost our potential as much as possible. And then, of course, as my augment effects on my weapon, I am running all 5 Appendage Crushers. This is a little bit less useful compared to the Core Crusher build, since we are going to be actually doing damage to appendages, but this still allows us to get that extra 2.5 times multiplier if we are targeting an appendage with it. And we can always swap appendages when one breaks, and a lot of the super bosses have a lot of appendages, so it's not the biggest deal in the world. So we're going to be still running those 5 Appendage Crushers to get the maximum benefit and damage out of it. And then I'm running 1 melee attack up just as a way to just kind of, well, boost my damage a little bit more, since I do have some melee arts here, and we're not focused entirely on potential. As far as the other armor pieces that I have on, I do have potential up in 2 of these slots, like I said, and the other augments are going to be my other reflections here. How many reflections you need to run really depends on the super boss you are fighting. If you're fighting something like Gradivis, you're going to need Reflect Gravity, Reflect Thermal, Reflect Physical, and Reflect Ether to go along with your Reflect Electric because it does all 5 types of that damage. If you're fighting something like Farsus, you can actually drop something like Reflect Thermal because it doesn't do any thermal type of damage. So it really just depends on what you are fighting. I have Reflect Physical on my shirt. I am once again running this Worn Combat shirt just because it has Reflect Physical on it, so it can save on augment slots, and that's really the only major reason I am doing that. I have the Reginald Trudgers, which has potential up as an effect on it from the shop. You can't get potential up on your leg piece any other way. And then, of course, I have Ultra Regal Ward and Ultra Boundless Bracer. These are my general melee attack boosts that I have here. That also come with some other useful effects like Max TP up and Overdrive Count up, so I like running them on pretty much every set. If you want more potential, you can replace these with shop gear as well, so that is a potential option available to you. And naturally, you can run even more potential up if you are not running the Reflect build, if you're using something like Ghostwalker to keep yourself healthy instead. And we will be showing that off a little bit as well. Regardless, I think that probably covers it for the general setup here. Potential is going to be really important to getting the most damage out of Javelin, so you don't really have other options for your armor augment slots, sadly. So we're going to mainly be focused on that. Now that all of that is done, let's get into how to use the Javelin practically and showcase what it can do. My apologies that it's always Gradivis. He really just is the best punching bag in the game for having massively more HP than pretty much every other enemy in the game. So, once again, I'll be fighting Gradivis to kind of show off the Electric Javelin set here. So I activate Raijin after activating Overdrive and getting out of my Skell. I'm going to be mainly focused on using Hair Trigger into 0-0 after that, and making sure that I have Combat Limbo active so I have additional time on my buff effects. Now, since Supercharge is a usage-based effect, that means that it's not going to be frozen by Combat Limbo, so that is one thing you're going to have to keep in mind. But once I basically kind of get my count build up, I use my purple art there to get my 5,000 TP back, which is really nice. Now I'm all the way back at 5,000 TP. I try to activate Hair Trigger before maximum voltage to get some benefit out of that, and it does increase the damage of the first hit there, which isn't too bad, but it's not going to do as much damage as you might hope. Outside of that, we're going to be mainly focused on just kind of using our melee attacks while we're waiting for maximum voltage to come back. Make sure we apply that electric resistance down, which is a really useful effect to have. Make sure we're doing everything that we can to get as much damage as we can out of the weapon. Now, Hair Trigger does increase the hit of the first hit of maximum voltage by about 50,000 to 100,000 or so, which isn't terrible, but it definitely could be a lot more. So it is a little bit unfortunate that we're not getting more damage and benefit out of this, sadly. But, you know, it's something. It's something, at least. It does do some extra damage. You might as well do it, just get some benefit out of it, and make sure you trigger those melee combos and keep that combo going. I reactivate Combat Limbo occasionally to make sure that we keep the effect of our Raijin. You should see that I'm basically taking no damage because we're reflecting absolutely everything, which is really nice. And whenever I get low on TP, I do make sure to activate my purple art. That also allows you to reactivate Overdrive if you ever run low on duration. The purple art also just does some decent damage too, so it's not bad to just kind of use in general. I am activating maximum voltage with quick recast a lot once it's on secondary cooldown, so we get the full tertiary cooldown bonus without having to wait as long. That is still something that is really, really nice about this game. I accidentally used 0-0 there. I'm going to use Combat Limbo, go into Combat Limbo, and once again, use Hair Trigger into maximum voltage for some extra damage here. So we're not necessarily doing terrible damage. We're doing 4 to 5 million per maximum voltage, which isn't the worst in the world. It is definitely not going to be on the same level as some of the absolute strongest weapons in the game, but you can make this work. Raijin's pretty good, and I do think this is still a pretty good build option. I mean, especially if you're running something that doesn't involve using Core Crusher. This is something you can do to get some damage and benefit out of this. So, right now, Gradivis has the aura up, so it's taking half damage right now, so we're going to have to kind of wait for that expire to do some more damage at the moment. But, in the meantime, we're still going to do as much damage as we can while this aura is up. So, I'm just kind of doing the same general strategy. Make sure I Hair Trigger before maximum voltage. Use my other melee arts in the meantime. Use my purple art to do some damage and boost my TP. And activate Combat Limbo whenever I remember to make sure that we keep up Raijin as much as possible. So that purple art, just restoring 3,000 TP every time is really, really nice and really, really useful. I get knocked back because Gradivis has some really weird properties if you're on top of it, even if you have Reflect or Ghostwalker active. Not a big deal. You can see how you kind of go into midair there if you use Vortex. That is one of the ways you can kind of float in midair using that in Sky High. So that is another thing that you can do, and it is also really, really funny when you end up doing that. So being able to reflect every single type of damage is still really, really strong. Another way you can make yourself invincible in this game. So that is very, very useful for really strong enemies like this. Like I said, there's some enemies that can kind of bypass your reflect, but that is alright. Having the electric resistance down effect is really nice. Do as much damage as possible to Gradivis here, even if it is taking a little bit longer, regardless. So now that the aura is gone, we're doing more damage again. But I've already broken the weaker appendages, so the appendage I'm targeting now, I believe, does not let me do as much damage. That's why we're not doing over 400,000 anymore. Once again, that's one of the weaknesses of a non-Core Crusher build. You can break the weaker appendages, and the stronger appendages are not going to do as much damage to, sadly, since they have higher hardness tiers. I do end up kind of changing my tier here to try to find one that's a little bit easier to hit than the one I was targeting. The hind legs are typically the ones that I know have a hardness of 0, so you get the most damage out of them, and I know I destroyed one of those already. But regardless, not a huge deal. We're already kind of at the point where we can just kind of easily blitz through the rest of his health bar. And I think this build is pretty fun. It's definitely really interesting, especially because you have to destroy your Skell first to get the most damage and benefit out of it. And you would not get as much damage if you did not destroy your Skell, sadly. So make sure you destroy that Skell. Every time you do a fight, you got to go and reset it at the hangar, though. That's the one kind of really annoying thing about it. Not to say you can't do these fights without destroying it, since you absolutely can, but, you know, you get the most damage and benefit if you do end up destroying it. So, once again, this is a pretty fun build. I'm glad I tried it out. I'm glad I did something besides Core Crusher here. And you know what? On enemies that aren't Gradivis, that don't have nearly as much health, you can kill them significantly faster at the very least, because, you know, you don't have to worry about 100 million health that you have to burn through. Now, after Gradivis, there's a 35 million health enemy in exclusively Chapter 13, a ghost enemy, and then I believe after that it's just Telethia with about 12 million or so. So yeah, it definitely kind of falls off really hard as far as health scaling. Alright, once again, on Farsis here, I end up getting my Skell destroyed, but we can use the same kind of general strategy after that. Activate Raijin, and then I'm going to alternate Hair Trigger and 0-0 here. I do have Ghostwalker equipped because Farsis has one singular attack that can bypass your nullify or your reflection by nullifying it. So just in case I see that, alright, I do have Ghostwalker available. I'm not going to use it in this fight because Farsis doesn't end up using that art. So that's really nice. So I don't have to rely on Ghostwalker at all, thankfully, but it is an option just to kind of make sure that I don't get hit by the Nullify Reflect attack. Nullify Reflect attack is called Dark Ray. That will bypass your reflection and still basically kill you in one hit no matter what. But other than that, the strategy is the same. I just have to manually activate Raijin and manually refresh buffs. So I don't have combat limiter to kind of freeze everything. You can see, though, maximum voltage just did like half of his health. Half of her health, I should say. Which is really, really strong. Now, unfortunately, I did destroy one of the weaker appendages, the wing there, so I'm going to do less damage with the second maximum voltage since I'm targeting the head now. I'm going to try to target the other wing here in a second so I do more damage again, but you can just see the damage difference there, unfortunately, when you're targeting an appendage that does not have the same hardness tier. So the wings are going to be the weakest appendages here, but once again, it becomes harder to do as much damage when you are not targeting the right appendages and when you break the weaker appendages. And that is, again, one of the weaknesses of not having Core Crusher, unfortunately. Not to say you can't have plenty of success, and if you are running those 5 appendage crushers, you can get a lot of benefit out of it if you do target the right appendage. Once I get targeted on the wing again here, I should be able to just kind of burst him down quicker, at least. Not as quick, but quicker. Farsis is kind of has an aura now that's going to reduce some of the damage, and it's also trying to regenerate a lot, so I do some less damage because of that as well. Once Farsis is at this health range, once I get the secondary cooldown again, I quick recast the tertiary, and Farsis goes down pretty easily as well. And then finally here, I'm going to show off an Ether build. So in this setup, I have replaced my weapon with an Ether weapon, I've re-equipped Core Crusher, and I've equipped a few different arts here. I have Early Bird as my aura instead, since I'm not focused on reflection, and I'm using Ghostwalker for my defensive option. This is going to be the optimal quote-unquote build. Basically where you are able to equip as much potential as possible, and you're using an Ether-based weapon since you aren't using the Reflect augments. And I did want to kind of show this off as well, just as a way to say, hey, if you want to be absolutely as optimal as possible, you probably want to do this instead. Since, while the unique build is fun, I do want to showcase if you are planning to use Javelin and to do as much damage as possible, you're probably going to want to do this. So your main source of damage is still going to be maximum voltage, so you still need to break your Skell, and you may still want to try to activate maximum voltage before Hair Trigger. And as you can see here, I'm now doing over 1 million per hit as opposed to only 400,000. So this is significantly more powerful, as sad as that is. Once again, Core Crusher is just really broken and really, really stupid, and that's just the way it is in this game, unfortunately. And of course, Ghostwalker allows you to free up your augment slots, meaning you'll get more damage out of it as well, which is why it is typically considered one of the absolute best defensive options that you have available to you. Other than that, a lot of the general strategies still apply. You still want to be using your purple art to build up your TP. You still want to use 0-0 to build up your count if you're running this set. And you want to reactivate Overdrive whenever you get low on count. So that is what we were focused on. That's what we were doing. And all in all, this is not too challenging of a fight, even if you change strategies and even if you use a different type of weapon here. But even still, even with all of this, even using an Ether Javelin, we are still, unfortunately, not doing nearly as much damage as other weapon types, just because the Javelin is going to be doing less damage than a lot of the other weapon types, because it just doesn't have the same tools available to it, sadly. But, you know, if you're using Javelin, you probably don't care about meta anyway. You're probably just here to have a good time, right? And that's what I wanted to kind of show off and what I wanted to kind of do here. Even with the aura active, we're still doing about 600k per hit of maximum voltage, which is still really nice. But, you know, sometimes if you're not using meta, you have to expect the non-meta results. And that is okay, because it's still a lot of fun to use Javelin. Every weapon type is fun. Every weapon type can be extremely broken. And it's not like this is bad or anything. We are still staying alive. We are still taking no damage using some of the really strong strategies the game has available to us. And, you know, that's really all you need in this game. Defensive options just allow you to have a lot of fun, experiment with the system, and using overdrive. And I think that is one of the coolest things that this game has available to it. So, like I said, mainly showing this off because I didn't want to show off the more quote-unquote optimal Javelin build. I also accidentally Ghost Walkered into his legs. That was unfortunate. But, you know, that happens sometimes. Get knocked back, doesn't really matter too much. The aura is gone now, so maximum voltage should do a lot of damage here. Yep, over 1 million per hit again. And Gradivis is almost dead at this point. I reactivate Ghost Walker one more time to be safe. Use Overwhelm to get my TP back. And then just hair trigger into maximum voltage once that is off the secondary. I probably could have just used it on secondary and killed anyway, but I wanted to be safe. I think that is going to cover it for this video. I do hope this guide was useful to you. If you do want to use the Javelin and maybe you learned something from it, and if you did, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends who are new to the game, and any other general support you give me, I would be greatly appreciative of. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Please look forward to all of my future guides, all my future weapon guides, my tier list, any other content I choose to make, and hopefully I will see you back here soon.